Welcome to Hidden Truths. Today we have our host, Joshua Barone. Welcome, Joshua. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. And yourself?
Great, great, great. Thank you. So today let's talk about Russia and all the propaganda that is going around when people look at what Russia is doing, look at what Vladimir Putin is doing, look at what's happening in various areas of the world because of his actions. So what do you think about this, Josh?
I find it interesting, and it's one of the things I mentioned before. It's disinformation. There's lots of propaganda going around, especially towards Russia. Think about it, that you go to the gas station and the president says, hey, we have to accept higher gas prices because we need to support the Ukrainian people. But in reality, that's not what's really going on. It's a lot of false narrative. For instance, there was a report of I think it was ABC News came out and said that a Russian warship had been sunk by the Ukrainians, and then a week later, it turns out it's sailing up the Black Sea towards Crimea. So what's real and what's not? Here I am. I'm supposed to be informed and trade on information, and I have no clue what's real and what's not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and everybody seems to be very confused. There have been lots of sanctions, right, against Russia. How are they working? How do you look at what's happening there in our government and the type of sanctions they are imposing, and does that influence?
Yeah, so when I look at the sanctions that they put on, they being our government, the US, I find it I I don't know how to put this. If Russia was a smaller economy, maybe they'd work if it was Iran. Sanctions worked on Iran because we really control that waterway with our military presence. Russia being such a large purveyor of resources, it just doesn't seem like they've worked. They've essentially shot the American consumer in the foot with higher oil prices, higher food prices,
Mhm.
and there hasn't been any real gain. Now, how do I quantify that? In 2021, the Russian economy was about 17 billion US dollars. In 2022, it's 18 billion US dollars. So their economy is actually growing. On top of that, there was a news report actually today that talked about their current account surplus had widened to 95.8 billion. And on top of that, if you look at a chart of the Russian ruble, it's the best performing currency against the US dollar. Now, I can argue points against that. For instance, that there is some manipulation in the currency by the Russian government to prop it up. You would expect that with what's going on. But again, when I look at it, sanctions don't seem to be working there. They essentially are hitting the US consumer at the pump in the grocery store. And I don't think that was their intention when they put the sanctions on, but that's what they're doing. And another note is that the guy that was, and I don't know his name offhand, but the guy that was the giving the administration the playbook, he quit. So maybe the administration changes course now, but that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, that's for sure. How about Brazil buying Russian fertilizer? It looks like a lot of countries are still doing business with Russia, like nothing ever happened.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Again, we're talking about commodities here.
Yeah.
And so there was this whole supply shock, and you saw commodity prices soar 50+%. And essentially, that's sanctions that saying, hey, these sanctions are going to work. Nobody's going to be able to buy Russian goods. But it's been the exact opposite. So fertilizer is a really big deal in terms of the food market. And when they invaded Ukraine, they essentially took that fertilizer market and shrank it, hence the supply shock. But Brazil just bought all the Russian fertilizer in a trade deal. And it really comes to this fact that it's really just the US and Europe sanctioning Russia. Nobody else is. And so there's lots of commodity leakage everywhere. There's oil going to China, there's oil going to India. Palladium, I haven't seen any exact specs, but palladium and it's a large Russian export. It's going places as well. So you have this commodities market that's really propped up on these supply sanctions, yet all this supply shock, it's all leaking back into the market. So is our commodity prices arbitrarily high? There's something called backwardation, i.e., the spot price, current spot price, and the future spot price. So in backwardation, the future spot price is lower than the current price. Typically, commodities run in something they call contango, where the spot price is higher than the spot price is lower than the future prices. And so backwardation says one of two things. Either all this stuff is coming into market and the market is forward pricing that in, or we have recession coming and it's pricing in, or a little bit of both. But what it tells me that if you're long commodities, maybe you should be reconsidering your position.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that type of sanction leakage and linked to the global recession that apparently is coming as well. What's your point on that?
So there was numbers coming out of China. They're the worst numbers I think I've ever seen coming out of China. Don't forget they have a zero COVID policy, so they've been shut down. You can't have gas prices at the pump in the US this high without causing a recession. I think there's a number out there. It's essentially 7 out of 8 times that you have an oil shock in gasoline prices, you've caused a recession. I don't think we should be talking whether a recession is coming, but how deep it is actually going to be is more the question that that is perplexing me. I don't know the answer to that, but at the same time, I know it's coming. Everything's slowing down. You're seeing it in the economic numbers. And again, I have a economist that works here that could explain that all to you. But barring that, yeah, it looks like we're in for a fairly severe recession. A lot of people say that's a good thing. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. Recession really hurts the poorest people in this country. You don't want to hurt those people. They're the hard workers.
Especially after what happened with COVID, so it's a double whammy here.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the administration doing to try to shift that potential recession that is coming into a different direction?
It's really tough because they talk one way and they act another. So for instance, they basically said, hey, we're going to open up drilling, but they said that as a presser, and then their policy was very much the opposite, where they made it more difficult to drill for oil. The administration has a real hard push for electric vehicles, and that's fine. There's the idea that I can just go buy a car, an electric vehicle, brand new, that's roughly $80,000. It's foreign to me. One, I'm not going to do it. And two, even if I could afford it, would I do that? And then think about all the people that aren't in my position. Can they do that? The idea that we're going to EV, yeah, that's probably true. But the length of time that it takes to get there is a lot longer than this administration wants to believe. And maybe it is their policy to make oil fairly expensive so that you do switch quicker to what they want you to switch to. I'm not a big subscriber of that kind of thing. Look, if you want to push it, that's fine. Incentivize us to go there, and that's fine. But don't incentivize us too quickly, because that causes pain. And you don't want to do that.
Can you talk to us about the end of a reserve currency status?
Yeah, I'm not supposed to talk about this that much, but essentially what happened is one of the sanctions was there's something called SWIFT, and SWIFT is an interbanking group and in this case it's international. So it's how banks clear each other's transactions on an international scale, without getting too detailed into it. So what happened is we banned Russia from SWIFT. And so there's a secondary system now being produced. And I want to say it is a Chinese system, actually. And the idea of the reserve currency is that everything kind of transacts in dollars. Because essentially dollars are safe. So the idea that you're going to the secondary interbanking system, maybe something else becomes the reserve currency on that system, maybe the yuan, something like that. And so you have the secondary system that they created. Now, how long does it take for us to lose reserve currency status? That's probably a long time. But the idea that you're starting to go down this path is what I wanted to point out. I don't think it's anytime soon that it'll happen. But again, that they're setting the stage for going down these paths. So reserve currency system is interesting, and it's good analogy is, do you know that if you fly an airplane and you're in a foreign country, the tower still speaks to you in English? And
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's pretty much the same thing. It's everybody talks to each other on the Swiss system, and it's really dollar based. Essentially, another system changes things.
So how about the Cold War too? What's your vision and input and insight on that one?
That's a NATO thing, really. So all of a sudden, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a NATO thing. It looks like with all the threats from Russia on all these other countries, that you're going to get all these countries joining NATO, and like Turkey's a NATO member, but Finland and Sweden joining, and it looks like we're going to stockpile weapons against Russia for a European invasion in there. This is essentially Cold War III. Again, long defense companies has been a good trade in this terrible market. So that's going to stay around. I think Javelin missiles, all this stuff. We're gonna send it over there. I think there was a bill in Congress spending $60 billion just to fund more weapons into Ukraine. Now, I don't understand that because one, Ukraine isn't a NATO country. Two, essentially giving them weapons is somewhat of an act of war. So I don't know what they're doing, but it seems a little crazy. There's a quote out there. Essentially, it says, escalation only leads to one place, and that place being some kind of war. Another anecdotal note that you'll find funny is that the U.S. has never gone to a war with a country that has a McDonald's. If you follow the news today, you'll see that McDonald's is pulling out of Russia and selling all its assets up. So I guess that's an indication that we are going to war with Russia. I guess you can make that assumption.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a scary thought for sure. The world seems to be a very unsafe place right now.
Yep. Yeah, it's not a very safe place right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know you cannot give any advice, but what would you like to leave your viewers with today?
Just you can't buy the narrative anymore. The narrative is so bent. And I think you're seeing that with Elon Musk and Twitter, that they're talking about all these bots and all this stuff. It's essentially you have to really think for yourself and really see what they're trying to sell you and not believe a lot of it, and go on your own nature and, find other news sources besides US ones and read foreign papers to see what's really going on and go that. It's a tough time we're in. We have so much information coming out at us that they figured a way to bend it even then. And I think that's scary. Press and media is supposed to tell you the truth, and it's all partisan and all sided, and it's weird. And I think that as we go forward, some of this stuff will get vetted out. But right now, you just have to be very careful of what information you believe and what you don't.
Wonderful. Thank you for your insight today, Josh.
Oh, thank you I guess it's my own show, so thanks for having me.
That's right. For all viewers, if you want to see all the other podcasts, you visit hiddentruths.com, and remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for your time, and see you next time.